Welcome to punctuation video number 4. In this video, we're going to look at some punctuation odds and ends that we haven't looked at in the previous videos. We're going to start off with the apostrophe. The apostrophe is used to denote possession. So if we have an object or a person possessing something in a sentence, we will use an apostrophe S. In this example here, we have the bed's sheets are falling apart. The bed is the owner of the sheets, so we have an apostrophe S after bed. So a single bed owns the sheets, or the bed's sheets are falling apart. Another example, the ugly gopher's wife ran away with Willie the Weasel. So here we have the ugly gopher owning the wife, not literally, I'm not trying to make a statement here. The ugly gopher's wife ran away with Willie the Weasel. So the gopher has the wife, therefore the apostrophe S. Apostrophes can cause some problems when we have a word that ends in an S. Here we have Dickens, as in Charles Dickens. His last name ends in an S, so we would be saying Dickens's when we want to denote possession. So in this sentence we have Dickens's serial novels prove just how talented a writer he was. The most common way of denoting this is just having the apostrophe after the S or S-sounding consonant at the end of a word, but we can also have the S as well. So if you want to use the traditional version, that's perfectly fine. They both say Dickens's in this case, so it's fine. Here's another example. I enjoy James's ability to articulate the deep themes within the Twilight films. So we're saying James is possessing. We could have the apostrophe S like this example up here, but most of the time we're just going to have the apostrophe to denote James's, or that James is possessing the ability. Sometimes the possessor in a sentence is going to be plural. We still use an apostrophe in this case, but we don't have the option for that extra S. It will just be the apostrophe. So in this case, we have many boys. The boys' father was a wise man. We have a group of boys, or sons in this case, and their father was a wise man. If we look at this next example, the boy's father was a wise man. This is singular, and this is where we have our apostrophe S. Okay, so it's one boy. That boy's father was a wise man. We have a single boy. Here's another example. The dog's crate needs to be clean. What do you think this means here? Well, if we look at the examples above, it would match this one up here, so there would be many dogs. The dog's crate needs to be cleaned. This means more than one dog frequents that crate. The room's paint is starting to fade. Well, that would match our second example here, so we have a single room. So if we were going to say multiple rooms, it would be the room's paint is starting to fade, but in this case we have a single room, so the room's paint is starting to fade. Another use of the apostrophe is with contractions. Contractions are two words condensed into one via the apostrophe. Some examples would be shouldn't, let's, we'll, etc. The full versions would be should not, let us, and we will. Be sure to use the full versions. Separate these contractions as they are not accepted in academic writing. They are considered informal writing. Now, one contraction that can draw confusion is its. When we see it apostrophe S, you might think that that denotes possession like the previous slide, but it does not. It's actually tricking you. Its means it is. It is a contraction. When we use its without an apostrophe, that denotes possession. So that is an exception to the rules that we just learned. Let's look at some examples. The wolf guarded its kill. So you can see that we don't have an apostrophe here, but it owns the kill, therefore it is possession. So this is correct. It's wonderful to see more wolves in the forest. You can see we're saying it is wonderful to see more wolves in the forest, therefore this version would be correct as well. Now we're going to move on to parentheses. These are relatively easy to learn if you understand the double comma rule that we've gone over already. Do you remember what it is? It's that a fragment within an independent clause can be surrounded with commas, which means that it can be removed without destroying the meaning of the sentence. The same thing applies with parentheses. So in this example, we have John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, mandatory curriculum, is a gloomy book about the Great Depression. We're probably denoting that it's mandatory curriculum for high school or something similar to that, but you'll notice that it's quite far outside of what the content of the sentence is. So if it's a complete aside, put parentheses around it. If it's still related to the sentence in a closer way, we're going to use the 2 commas instead. You'll find that you'll use the 2 commas far more than you'll use parentheses. Also, remember that if we have punctuation around or near the parentheses, it always comes after the parentheses. The trick here is to remove the parenthetical reference or whatever it may be and look at the sentence and see if the punctuation is correct. If it is, just make sure when you put the parentheses back in that the punctuation comes afterward. So let's look at this example. I aged the steaks 28 days, April 1st to 28th, comma, and the meat became green. Okay, well, let's remove this. I aged the steaks 28 days, comma, and the meat became green. So you'll see we have a coordinated conjunction here, and that comma is coming after the parentheses. So it's quite a simple rule. Just remember, your punctuation will always come after, not before, if it needs to be in the sentence to begin with. The dash is an informal form of punctuation which we generally want to avoid using in academic writing. Dashes are used to denote a sudden break in thought that we often have in speech. So it is an excellent tool to use with creative writing, but generally speaking, we want to leave it out of academic writing. So we'll look at this first example. George, I cannot believe it, told us about the new pay cut. You'll notice sometimes when we're speaking to one another, we will have these sudden breaks in thought. We don't want to have that in academic writing because we're looking for clarity. The next example has, only one person could tell us about the pay cut, George. Okay, we have a sudden break here and we move on to the fragment George. The better way to use this would be to turn it into independent clauses and use a colon. So the uses of the dash, to highlight information and to represent a stiff break in thought. Once again, we want to avoid using the dash because it is considered informal. Brackets are used in research writing. When we take a direct quotation from someone else, sometimes the quotation will not make sense in the given context. So let's look at an example. Rudy disagrees and states, Jesse did not have a gun and could not defend himself. Here, we likely had a pronoun here before, but without the antecedent Jesse, we might not understand who this person is referring to. So we've replaced the pronoun with the antecedent Jesse. You'll also note that this does not change the meaning of the sentence in any way. Another example, Thornton sees this as an atrocity. This was likely saw at the beginning, past tense. We want to bring that up to present tense for research writing, so it's going to become Thornton sees this as an atrocity. And our final example, the highway to Fernie, Highway 3, is one of the windier thoroughfares in Western Canada. Well, you'll note that Highway 3 was added, and it might not have been part of the original document at all. But it is the highway to Fernie, so we can add in Highway 3 here for clarity. The ellipsis mark is much the opposite of brackets. We use brackets to add information to quotations, and we use the ellipsis to denote leaving things out of a quotation. So it consists of 3 spaced periods, and it comes in the middle of a sentence or between sentences. We don't want to have it at the end of a sentence as you'll normally see in informal communication like on Facebook or something similar. We want to have it in the middle. Okay, and let's take a look at an example. McCrank found several uses for the experiment that no one else thought of. So here we're saying there was likely some information in this document about these uses, and you can go back to the document if you'd like and you can check those out. But for our use, we're just going to leave that information out because we're not deeming it important to the document that we're writing. Here's another example. McLanigan's experiment destroyed the lab. He did survive the explosion. Okay, here we have 4 dots, if you notice. That means that we left things out in between these 2 sentences. So there are several sentences in between these, maybe only one or several, that probably talked about the lab and how it was destroyed, maybe what was destroyed, how much money it cost, things like that. But what's important to us is that he survived this explosion. So if you want to see the rest of that information, you can go back to the original document and have a look. We're going to wrap up this slideshow by looking at italics. Italics are used to emphasize certain words in a sentence. They're the equivalent of underlining major titles such as books, films, and plays, and essentially it's the same rule. We're just emphasizing the title that we're looking at. In the example here I just read Tolkien's The Hobbit for the 476th time. You'll notice that I enunciated this a little bit differently because it's in italics. We can also use it to define or highlight specific words, or just that general emphasis we've already talked about. Here's an example of using italics purely for style. You should not use italics for every word you deem as important. So we're saying, okay, this is an important word. I want you to pronounce it a little bit different than the others to show that it is highlighted. So it's effective, but we want to use this highlighting sparingly or it loses its effectiveness. Here's another example. The name Gilligan refers to a man who was aboard the SS Minnow. Okay, so Gilligan, we're highlighting that. That's what we're kind of defining here, and it's a young man who was aboard that ship. Another example, he prefers to say bonjour instead of hello. So when we use words from another language, we should highlight those so that they stand out. You'll notice when you read novels, etc., that break into another language, you'll see them in italics. That brings us to the end of punctuation video number 4. Please be sure to review the video if you found any of these concepts confusing.